You were taught to always be available, to respond immediately, to explain yourself, even when no one asked, to smile when it hurt, to say yes when you meant no, and to be nice, no matter what it cost you. And over time, you accepted that as normal, not because it felt right, but because it felt expected. But here's the hidden truth. Every time you over-explain, over-give, over-smile, you trade your power for approval. So often, you think it's generosity. But the world doesn't reward kindness. It rewards predictability. You've become emotionally accessible to everyone and sovereign to no one. You think you're being kind. But really, you're bleeding energy. Your attention, your emotions, your inner peace. They're all on demand, and the more accessible you are, the less others respect your boundaries, because you haven't respected them yourself. So the question becomes, what happens when you stop being easy to reach? When your emotional buttons go offline? When your silence is no longer emptiness, but power? That's where we begin. Part 1. Button free. Living. Why reactivity makes you weak. Let's start with something uncomfortable. Most people aren't living, they're reacting. Every glance, every message, every opinion pulls them like strings on a puppet. Why? Because somewhere along the way, we were conditioned to believe that reacting means we're present, that fast replies equals confidence, that explaining ourselves equals maturity. But none of that is true. Reactivity doesn't make you present. It just makes you readable. And when your emotions are on display, raw, unfiltered, accessible, you become easy to predict, and even easier to manipulate. People don't need to hurt you directly. They just learn where your buttons are. And once they know, all they have to do is press and watch you perform. This isn't theoretical. This is behavioral neuroscience. When someone triggers you through judgment, rejection, praise, or comparison, you experience a dopamine response. Your brain registers the stimulus, categorizes it as a threat or reward, and initiates a reflex loop. React, release, relief. And just like that, you're caught in a neurological cycle that feels automatic. But here's the truth. It's not truly automatic. It's unconscious. And what's unconscious can be trained. Emotional maturity doesn't mean you feel less. It means you react less and choose more. The moment you stop jumping at every signal, every ping, every provocation, you interrupt the loop. You reclaim the pause between stimulus and response. And in that pause, you regain your power. Carl Jung said it best, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is exactly what happens when you stop living from emotional habit and start living from conscious control. But here's the part no one teaches you. Reactivity isn't just weakness, it's visibility. And in a world full of manipulators, the more visible your triggers, the more dangerous your emotional openness becomes. So how do you protect yourself? You learn to become unreadable, not by suppressing emotion, but by mastering when and where to show it. The emotionally disciplined don't respond to noise. They wait, they watch, they choose, and because they choose, they become unshakable. Ask yourself, how often are you pulled into explaining things that don't need to be justified? How often do you rush to prove your goodness to people who aren't even listening? That urgency to defend, to explain, to be liked, is the very thing that gives others control over you. But the moment you let go of that need, you stop being predictable And once you stop being predictable, you become powerful. Because when nothing hooks you emotionally, nothing moves you without your permission. And once you stop reacting, something strange happens. Silence begins to work in your favor. Part 2. The power of silence and mystery. In a world that rewards noise, silence is rebellion. We live in an age of overexposure. Everything is broadcasted, filtered, explained, measured by likes, shares, and validation loops. People share not just their thoughts, but their reactions, their doubts, their healing, their pain, as if constant transparency equals authenticity. But here's the paradox. The more you reveal, the less they respect. The more they know, the less they value. In that overexposed landscape, mystery becomes a superpower. The less you give, the more they lean in. The less you explain, the more they wonder. This isn't manipulation. It's energetic intelligence. Humans are biologically wired to pursue what feels uncertain, what they can't immediately access or decode. What's rare gets valued. And that's the magic of intentional silence. The moment you stop narrating your every move, stop clarifying, defending, detailing, you don't fade. You deepen. Think about the people who walk into a room and shift the atmosphere without saying a word. They don't chase attention. They command it. Not because they perform louder, but because their restraint carries gravity. That's not arrogance. That's energetic clarity. It's the quiet message that says, I don't need to be consumed to be real. And the world, confused by stillness, takes notice. When you master restraint, you create space for others to feel your presence, rather than just hear your noise. This is what Carl Jung meant by the integration of the shadow. When you no longer need to perform lightness, to make people comfortable with your depth, you're no longer seeking to be digestible. You're seeking to be whole. Because silence is not emptiness. It's containment. It's discernment. It's the refusal to spend energy where it won't be valued. It's the quiet decision to protect your inner world from external intrusion. And here's the deeper psychology. Silence triggers projection. When you say nothing, people fill in the blanks. And often, what they imagine is more powerful than anything you could have said. Mystique forces people to confront the unknown. Not just about you, but within themselves. And in that discomfort, you gain leverage. But be warned, when you choose mystery over accessibility, the world doesn't applaud. It panics. People will call you cold, aloof, distant, detached. But pause. Ask yourself, are they genuinely worried about you? Or are they simply reacting to the sudden loss of control? Because when people no longer have access to your emotional dashboard, they no longer have leverage. And what they often call arrogance is just your refusal to perform vulnerability on demand. You've stopped being readable. You've stopped being reactive. And in that act alone, you've become sovereign. This is not disconnection. It's intentional containment. It's the quiet construction of a self, no longer shaped by noise, but by choice. But people will start accusing you of being cold, distant, arrogant. Are they right? Or are they simply uncomfortable with your control? Part 3. Self-control is not repression. There's a dangerous confusion that needs to be cleared up. Silence is not suppression, and self-control is not emotional denial. We've been told, subtly, consistently, that holding back is weakness, that if you don't speak your mind immediately, you're repressed, that if you choose not to react, you're avoiding truth. But that's not psychological strength. That's noise, dressed up as honesty. Let's get precise. Repression is what happens when you bury emotion, when you're afraid to feel, afraid to confront, so you shove it into the unconscious. But here's the problem. What's repressed never dies. It waits, it distorts, and eventually, it leaks. Carl Jung said it best. What you resist persists. Unfelt emotions don't disappear. They harden. They disguise themselves as sarcasm, resentment, overreaction, or fatigue. You think you've silenced them, but they're speaking through your behavior every day. Now compare that to regulation. Emotional regulation is not about pushing feelings away. It's about holding space for them, observing them, and choosing what to do with them consciously. Self-control is not the suppression of anger, sadness, or disappointment. It's the mastery of how, when, and whether those emotions deserve expression. And that is not fear. That is power. The difference is internal posture. Repression says, I can't feel this. I'm not allowed. Regulation says, I can feel this. I just don't need to act on it right now. Repression stems from shame. Regulation stems from sovereignty. One is driven by fear of judgment. The other is driven by clarity of intention. Think of your inner world as a fire. Repression puts a lid on it, until pressure builds and it explodes. Regulation learns to manage the flame, to let it warm you, not burn you. And here's the deeper layer Jung invites us to see. Most reactions are defense, protecting the wound beneath. The need to always explain? It protects a fear of being misunderstood. The need to always justify your choices? It protects a wound where self-worth was once questioned. But when you become aware of these patterns and choose not to indulge them, you begin the process of individuation. You step out of your programming. You stop being a slave to your reflexes, and you start becoming your own architect. True self-control is not a denial of the self. It's the integration of it. You are no longer pushed by your pain or pulled by your past. You are centered. You act because you decide. Not because something inside you screams louder than your wisdom. And when you stop justifying yourself, you start conserving something even more important than energy: your presence. Part 4. Boundaries as unspoken laws. Most people misunderstand boundaries. They think of them as fences, things you put up to keep others out. But real boundaries, they're not visible, they're not loud, and they're never performative. True boundaries are energetic. They are contracts, and they are silent. You don't need to declare them. You embody them. And when you do, the world adjusts accordingly. People don't respect your boundaries because you announce them. They respect them because you live by them. It's not about saying, I need space. It's about moving in a way that says, I value my energy. I protect my peace. I don't explain my availability. I am not always open for business. Let's get practical. We've all met two types of people. First dash, the one who answers immediately. Every message, every call, every ping gets a response. They're always accessible, always explaining, always exhausted. Second dash, the one who responds with intention, who doesn't react instantly, who makes you wait. Not out of arrogance, but out of alignment. That second person moves differently. They're not chaotic. They're composed. And whether you admit it or not, you respect them more. Why? Because we instinctively respect what isn't freely available. Because their energy isn't scattered. It's curated. Psychologically, humans calibrate value through scarcity and consistency. If your presence is always available, it begins to blend into the background. But if it's intentional, people pay attention when you show up. And here's the paradox. The more clearly you live your boundaries, the less you need to defend them. Because people begin to feel. Not just what you say yes or no to, but what you no longer entertain. The energy you don't give. The messages you don't answer. The arguments you don't join. The explanations you stop offering. Boundaries aren't loud. They're repeated. You teach people how to treat you. Not with your words, but with what you allow, what you tolerate, and most importantly, what you walk away from without guilt. And no, it's not always easy. Living with boundaries may cost you some connections. Some people won't like the fact that they no longer have full access to you. They'll say you've changed. And they're right. You've changed the terms of engagement. You're no longer available on demand because you've stopped negotiating your worth. You are not obligated to make your energy universally accessible. You are not here to be emotionally on call. You are not required to explain your silence. Boundaries are your way of telling the world, this is how I value myself, without needing to prove it. But even when you master boundaries, there's still one final layer to face. The identity you built to survive, but can no longer live inside. Part 5. Rejecting the role that no longer fits. At some point in your life, you learned to perform, not because you were fake, but because the world made it clear. Your raw self wasn't always welcome, so you adapted. You smiled when you didn't want to. You became agreeable, useful, predictable. You wore the mask that made you safer, more liked, more acceptable. And for a time, it worked. You got the job, the approval, the validation. You avoided conflict. You kept the peace. But slowly, the cost began to surface. Beneath the performance, something started to ache. Because every time you reinforced the role, you weakened the connection to your real self. Carl Jung called this the persona. The socially constructed identity we wear to navigate the world. Necessary, yes, but dangerous when mistaken for who we are. You see, the persona begins as protection, but if left unexamined, it becomes a prison. And one day, you wake up exhausted. Not from doing too much, but from being someone you no longer recognize. You realize you've spent years editing yourself to fit into spaces that were never built for your authenticity. Here's the deeper truth. You didn't choose the role. You inherited it from your family, your culture, your trauma. You became what they needed. And in doing so, you lost what you needed. This is where shadow work begins, because the parts of you that don't fit the role, the anger, the desire, the intensity, the truth, were pushed underground, repressed, judged, called too much, too emotional, too complicated. But Jung reminds us, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not the version that pleases, not the version that performs, the version that doesn't apologize for existing. To get there, you must face the role you've played, not with shame, but with clarity. Thank it. It kept you alive. It helped you survive. But now it's costing you your soul. It's why the crowd feels lonelier than silence. The reason success doesn't feel like fulfillment. The reason your laughter sometimes feels scripted, because it is. And that's not weakness, that's awareness. And awareness is the first step to individuation. The lifelong process of shedding what is not you to uncover what has always been. This shedding isn't glamorous, it can be lonely. Some people will leave because they were attached to your character. Not your core, but what remains is real. Raw, unpolished, and finally, yours. And when you stop performing, something remarkable happens. The world becomes quieter. Not because it changes, but because you no longer seek its permission. Part 6. The final layer, internal validation. There comes a moment in your inner work where the world no longer needs to agree with you for you to feel whole. This is the final layer, the shift from needing to be understood to choosing to be centered. Most people live trapped in the silent addiction to external confirmation. Do they see me? Do they get me? Do they approve of how I handled that? And when the answer is no, their sense of self-worth collapses. But here's the truth. Validation is not a need. It's a habit rooted in early survival. When being accepted meant being safe. When being liked was the only way to belong. But now, as an adult, that same dependency makes you emotionally exposed. Vulnerable to anyone who withholds their approval. You become addicted to being understood. And worse, you confuse being understood with being loved. This is where Carl Jung's words cut deep. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become. Choosing to become something different requires letting go of the need to be explained, even when misunderstood, especially when misunderstood. Because here's the paradox: the more you need others to get you, the more you compromise who you really are just to be palatable. You smooth your edges, you over-explain, you translate your truth into something others will accept. And in doing so, you abandon the very core you're trying to express. But internal validation is different. It's quiet. It doesn't ask for applause. It doesn't perform. It simply knows dash. I was aligned with myself, even if no one saw it. And that knowing, that's where sovereignty begins. When you choose to be misunderstood, but remain centered. When you choose silence, not out of fear, but out of restraint. When you trust that your value exists, outside the eyes of others. This isn't emotional distance, it's emotional dignity. You don't explain to everyone. You don't respond to provocation. You don't rush to correct someone's false narrative, because your peace is no longer up for public debate. And what does that look like in real life? You receive the criticism, and don't need to reply. You're left out. And it doesn't define your worth. You're misjudged. And you stay composed. Not because you don't care, but because you care more about what's true than what's perceived. And slowly, your silence becomes power. Not passive, not performative, but sovereign. You no longer need the world to understand your process, because you've become a master of your inner witness. And when you live like that, something shifts, not just inside you, in the way the world treats you. My silence is not absence, it's dominion. You've now reached a place most never dare to explore, the quiet space where you no longer chase being seen, because you've already seen yourself. This isn't the end of a transformation. It's the beginning of dominion, not over others, but over your own emotional terrain. You don't explain your value, you live it. You don't beg to be understood. You hold your ground in mystery. And no, Your silence is not an absence. It's a presence that no longer performs. Because the one who doesn't rush to respond controls the conversation without speaking. The one who doesn't fight to be heard commands deeper respect than the loudest voice in the room. So here's your moment. If this resonated, if something in you shifted, leave this phrase in the comments. My silence is not absence, it's dominion. Let that be your declaration. Let it be the mark of your shift. And now, no fanfare, no farewell, just space. The kind of space that only those who've claimed themselves know how to sit with. I disappear now, but only in sound, because silence is how I leave the loudest mark.